Recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an important hearing. It's high time that the United States grapple strategically with how to end the Syrian conflict. It is patently clear that there can be no resolution with Assad in power, especially as he continues to prioritize a war against moderate groups seeking democracy over a war against ISIS. His slaughter of innocent civilians is barbaric, and the United States cannot hope to defeat ISIS with Assad as the only alternative. Dr. Rand, the Southern Front has been effective in keeping extremist groups from expanding control in southern Syria. How can we, along with our allies in Israel and Jordan, further support the Southern Front and help them protect against Assad?
Thanks, Congresswoman. This is an important issue, and actually, because of the focus on Idlib and Aleppo in the past year or so, I think a lot of the attention has shifted away from the Southern Front, so I think it's important to raise it again. You know, a year and a half ago, the governance or so of the Southern Front provided kind of a model of a multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian type of governance. They issued a communique talking about inclusion and representation among the different sects that seemed quite hopeful and seemed potentially a paradigm that could be transported for other parts of Syria. So the key here, I think, is twofold. One is to support the continued moderation of the leadership of the Southern Front to make sure they continue to support different ethnic groups and you know, there's some inclusion of al-Qaeda elements, and I'll let my colleague talk about it, but overall they've been more moderate than some of the other oppositionists. But second is to support them in their counterterrorism needs against ISIS and other more extremists that might challenge their hegemony in this part of Syria.
Well, Mr. Lister, thank you, Dr. Rand. Mr. Lister, can you discuss coordination between Kurdish forces such as the SDF and YPG and, frankly, and other moderate forces and, I'll say, local groups? In what ways could the U.S. help advance cooperation between the Kurdish and moderate forces across the country to ensure that areas freed from the Assad regime can, in fact, remain free of terrorism?
Again, that's a very important question. I mean, I think what I've tried to focus on in part in my remarks is to suggest that Syria can't be looked at as a whole, right? So what we've seen develop in the northeast with the Kurdish YPG and its various allies is one specific component of a much broader reality. What works in the northeast doesn't work in the south. We're not going to see a reflection of the Kurdish Confederation in the northeast suddenly appearing in southern Syria with a predominantly Sunni Arab population. So I think we should, you know, kind of take care of what we've helped to develop in the northeast, but we also need to also be aware of the negative knock-on effects of some of these other actors' actions. And so I genuinely am concerned that if we pursue what I think we will pursue, which is a YPG, SDF-led offensive on Raqqa, they will very seriously consider whether it takes 1 month or 12 months, some kind of power-sharing agreement with the Assad regime.
Power-sharing agreement.
That kind, it's already happened.
Right.
As I said in my opening remarks, in northern Aleppo, they've handed territory over to the Assad regime. Now, if that happens in Raqqa, that is a jihadist's dream. It fulfills everything they have said for 6 years, that not only will the West not help protect your civilians, but eventually they'll come in and do their selfish thing, which is fight terrorism, and then eventually they'll give it over to the dictator again. So we must be very, very careful of preventing a scenario like that from coming true. And comments from senior military officials here that we have no control over the decisions of our local partners, frankly, is a cop-out.
It is a cop-out. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Singh, the Assad regime uses aerial bombardment and terrorizing weapons to strategically displace the civilian populations in opposition areas. In what ways have Sunni extremist forces and pro-Iranian militias taken advantage of Assad's attacks and displacement of civilians?
Well, I think that it's an important question, Congresswoman, and Mr. Lister referred to this before, but I think there's no doubt that the brutalization of civilians, the brutalization of the populations is a boon to the extremist groups who, as Mr. Lister pointed out, play on this sort of anti-Assad narrative to boost their own fortunes. And we've seen exactly that occur because we have seen, I think, especially in western Syria, the extremist forces amongst the opposition gain in strength in recent months. As for the Iranians, I think, are complicit in Assad's actions. And so it's not necessarily right to talk about them gaining from them. They're actually part of those actions because it's the Iranians that I think have the greatest force on the ground backing Assad, and I think we need to ascribe blame to them for much of what he does.
I agree. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My